this design center entrance pavilion. It actually has a longer name. It's the Juliana, Curran, Terian Design Center Entrance Pavilion. So it is a small scale project and it has a lot of complicated parts. I'll try and talk about how it was developed, and I'm going to reference a couple other projects because that's kind of how ideas work in our office in a relatively maybe non-linear, one could say slightly complex way. I'll just try and explain the kind of the development of the project. I think there's probably other burning questions on people's minds. I did, as this project was being finished, there were these sort of things where educators get together. I'm also dean of the school here, a whole bunch of deans there. But the question that was on their mind is, how did I manage to get a building built without getting fired at the same time? And I think I probably won't answer that tonight. But the jury is still out. The building was just finished a couple of months ago, so anything can happen this summer, I guess. But in any case, this is really a kind of diagram of how just current projects and how we work. These are an assortment of projects, from houses that are going on to some really small projects. I guess I can move this cursor. You know, this is like a little apartment. There's a house in Texas, a small prefabricated house, and even those projects kind of intersect with larger public works, and there's a kind of always this kind of interesting sort of interplay between all these projects, and it isn't linear, and it isn't necessarily the most kind of logical relationship, but a lot of it is really related to the main things that we think about in our work, which is the kind of experience of the site, the experience of the building, and just some of the kind of, I would say, shall we say, decisive kind of formal characteristics of the building, and I'll point that out in a minute. The campus, as you can see, which is kind of an interesting little story, I'll just be very brief. You can see that it was actually a city grid. The map on the far left shows just buildings that were scattered about in city blocks. There was actually an elevated train. The Pratt campus was founded by an industrialist who built a bunch of loft buildings mixed into the city grid. If the school failed, they could be converted into factory buildings. So the buildings are kind of anonymous industrial buildings, loft buildings. They're exquisite buildings, of course. They're the buildings that everybody loves. The middle slide shows how this mall eventually kind of developed as the city grid was evaporated or taken away. And then the slide on the far right shows the mall as it's really being developed. And I'm going to step over here and show you just what a kind of pinpoint this project is. But this little orange thing is really the first of these reorienting the campus and all these buildings toward a kind of central green. So to have this building be an entrance piece, and I'll show the cursor, this is actually the site of the building, this void between these two loft buildings that face, again, this kind of emergent green space. This is another set of loft buildings on the campus. This is actually what they call Main Hall. These loft buildings with these sky bridges, you can see the black skylight sticking up, and I think it has a really sort of beautiful character. Again, maybe the buildings, you could say, are a little bit generic, loft-like, anonymous, with these almost kind of delicate, kind of constructivist firescapes, metal firescapes, and certainly that affected our thinking as we were thinking of how to intervene in these projects. The design problem here was how to connect two large loft buildings, which were going to then house the entire, all the design disciplines in the campus. The entire sort of complex is like 170,000 square feet of all this interior space and, auditorium and galleries and all these things. But the actual entrance was through this slot of space where the buildings were actually disconnected. We're looking out of the mall from the courtyard across this kind of boiler room. So it's an odd site, obviously. It's normally, you would think the site would be turned 90 degrees, but this was really it. It was a 20-foot by about 70-foot-high space, and that was the site. So the building, obviously, this kind of initial diagram said, obviously, there has to be a loop that connects all of the interior spaces of the building, but there also has to be some kind of, interaction with the vertical dimension of the building. So this was a very early kind of study model where the void, the interior void, that courtyard between the two buildings, you can see in the slide on the left, then connects through to this elevated volume, which it serves many things. It's a kind of window between the campus, between the main campus and the courtyard. It also, as a volume, also serves as a kind of protecting element, an architectural element for the entrance space. And the entrance space is a podium. We conceptualized this podium that would draw people into the building. The first floor, as with many buildings on the campus, is up about 5 feet above the grass. So there was already this kind of vertical kind of organization, and then eventually, which was, of course, that was abandoned for cost reasons. I guess that's part of the story of this project, is what got lost, what got kept. But there was a kind of spiraling sequence that we imagined through the entire building so that another volume would project out at the very top as a kind of lookout piece. One building is taller than the other, so it could really be suspended in the air. But the original conception was really a kind of vertical organization of almost these disparate parts, these different things. Then we did a drawing where we tried to, this is a kind of computer drawing as opposed to a sketch, where we tried to imagine bridging elements, a kind of volume that's floating, subterranean kind of spaces where projection might take place, and that's just another view of the model. This just, a number of our public buildings, in fact, I would say probably the last 3 we've done, are all these metal shells that have a kind of singular quality. This is a building for the Housing Authority, Clarence, Queens, and this building is a kind of multi-purpose auditorium, and it's a focal point for all these brick buildings again, these kind of rather again generic brick New York City buildings, and this is a singular kind of metal shell, aluminum clad building. And this shows another kind of process idea where we look at a number of these kind of faceted roofscapes. You can see the building is just a simple room with a complex form that again serves as a kind of focal point around these buildings. This was studied more from a kind of structural perspective. It's a rather, I would say, kind of primitive building relative to the Pratt building in terms of its functions. And it's just an open kind of structure. This is the final kind of interior view of the building. That's another kind of computer rendering. And then this kind of faceted sort of shape, which really says that the publicity, the public quality of the building is based on difference. It's something different than the brick buildings around it. So as we started to think about this thing, we thought that the window itself, the idea of the volume, this suspended volume, as a window wasn't enough, that somehow the building had to literally kind of start to kind of work its way in a more animated way through that vertical slot. And these are some of the studies that started to look at that. One's a sketch, and then the other one is actually looking at then all the components of the building, from the podium to the volumes above, and then this is that kind of a next sort of iteration of this, which is really now looking at kind of the formal qualities of the building. We're starting to look at a little bit inside. We were thinking then that it's some kind of metal-clad, again, metal shell building. As we started to look at it, we were trying to also get kind of transparency between the existing brick building, so we were perforating the shell. We were trying to introduce light into it from above, and it just, at a certain point, I think the thing lost, in a sense, its kind of body, or its quality as a simple sort of steel volume that in its kind of placement, strategic placement, does a lot of things. So there was almost too much intruding at that point. So we started to look again at another set of projects. This was a competition for the Queens Museum, which we went into a finalist phase, but this was looking at a very big kind of classical building and introducing these very discrete kind of strips of architecture. They're really gallery volumes, and I can maybe point to one of them just to show you that these were sort of placed as very kind of specific volumes into the building. There's a plan organization, early sketch. So all of these things, there was a band of cinema, there was a band of galleries, and then there was a band of offices that then was the only intervention, a kind of condensed kind of publicity. Again, they marked their difference in their publicity by a certain kind of formal complexity. And here you can see the strategy, a big shed with very condensed kind of buildings, and that they have, in this way, a kind of simple, almost kind of brutality relative to the existing shell. And this shed then shows the inside of that space in a way almost kind of serene, but with the kind of complexity of the geometry, in this case bent from the grid of the building on a slight angle so that you could see that big globe out in front of the Queen's Museum. So this, the final component of this too, when we did this competition, this had, I actually remember, a nice ideas, and another one was then at the ends of these tubes of space is to project actually in a digital form or a video form the artwork that's going on inside the gallery, so that as you could drive by the Grand Central Parkway, you might be able to get some sense of what's going on inside the building. So there was both this idea of difference and publicity in this building. So the way we kind of finished up then the project is we do both these kind of digital models, but we also build these very large kind of foam core mock-ups. These things are almost as big, you can almost stick your head in these things. We project light on them, we do a number of different things, then digitally we overlay materials. So this is just kind of the raw sort of form as we start to study light and space, which is really how I think then, our architecture always kind of takes its final shape, which is really looking at the experience. These are some of the plans and sections. I just wanted to show that the building has a lot of more sophisticated things built into it than obviously the Ladner building. It's a kind of thick wall. It's this idea of thickened space that is very careful about the way in which light enters, particularly from the south. The north is kind of an open gallery. And those thick walls also relate to the way in which we're finding, as we start to think about sustainability and the way in which air moves through buildings. Now, we have to kind of reserve all this space for that. Air has to move more slowly. It has to move in very careful ways. So that in combination with this idea of a much more, I would say, kind of serene and directed space to the campus, we're starting to really think about how those spaces work. And this is the kind of reworked version of these foam core models. The slide on the left is that southern light. It's kind of south, though it would be southwestern light. The building's on a kind of angle, because here in the north face, which has mostly northern light, in the morning you get this kind of glancing light, which is really quite beautiful, and that's open just to the trees. The slide on the left is open to that very compressed kind of courtyard. Another view from the side, then the flanking walls were really for the display of art. And I would say that kind of gallery function is so critical in a school of art and design. That's really the main way that people communicate, is through their work on walls. Every student has to have a thesis project. Every student has to hang their work for 3 or 4 days as part of the graduation requirements. And then finally, that north window, which was great as beautiful northern light, also serves in the evening as its kind of drive-in movie function. So we were able to do a rear screen projection that fills the entire space. And in fact, at the opening, there was a lot of fun projecting images out onto that space. And this is just another project which I'll breeze through very quickly, just a thickened space. I guess this was kind of a rather shameless way to say that we're working with Fountainhead on a project, which I should actually thank them very sincerely for both this entire program tonight and also all the support they've given us over the years. They're great builders, and this is a church in Greenwich Village that's underway, and it really deals with that kind of thickened space, using the thick walls as a way to kind of understand light. And then this is then the construction. These buildings, this building was quite small scale, but very complicated, and of course very vertical. It was really kind of urban dental work, I think, just kind of shoring everything out and rebuilding things that fall apart. And then the building itself, of course, once that, in a sense, the site was the vertical surfaces of the building, that then the structural system had to lock into all those vertical surfaces. There's only one visible column. There's only one kind of exposed column you can see here, because the buildings kind of shift. The rest of the framing all had to be built into the side walls of the building, and then it's a relatively lightweight construction, all heavy gauge steel studs, and then sheathed in a concrete board, and with then finally kind of struggling through the material questions as we wanted to do rusted steel, which of course has a certain kind of complexity in New York City. And we went round and round until one of our brilliant, heroic Board of Trustee member, Bruce Gitlin, who owns Building Buffkin, stepped in and came up with a brilliant solution, which is actually this kind of this very unusual anodized stainless steel. Apparently, it can be kind of bathed and electrified, and it starts to change color. And as it changes color, it goes from black to blue to red, and it does so kind of instantaneously. So you can't do much with it. You can just pick one of those. We picked black because of and it's a kind of blackening. It's not pure black, but it related very much to the kind of context, to that constructivist context. And these are some of the panels. It just kind of snaps onto this very lightweight building and preserves, I think, that kind of metallic, shell-like quality. I guess the thing that was so amazingly brilliant is one of these kind of inflected faces is facing on the left. That faces more to the north and the east. The other one, it kind of tilts inward and faces the brick buildings. And we thought we were so brilliant because suddenly we realized as they were going up that the stainless steel was reflecting the brick. So we suddenly got a kind of reddish panel, which was a complete accident. And so some people really congratulated us on that thoughtful introduction of red. And we, of course, accepted the compliment without saying anything. But it really was I think, a wonderful kind of finish to the project. These are the finished slide, obviously facing north, and then the kind of the thick wall that faces south, which actually then houses a projection room. The simple kind of side walls of the gallery, and then there's a number of spaces that kind of draw you into the existing buildings, kind of in and out of the buildings. This is a steel stair which was inserted into this double height space that we cut away in the existing buildings, where you can literally walk past the kind of structural support for the steel volume. And then there's an evening where we did our first experimental projection. It's much better now with the pros on campus who really know what they're doing. This was just us kind of experimenting, but it was a lot of fun. And the podium was just this cast concrete. That was really one of the very last things to be built, which was the cast concrete podium, and the materials being just the concrete of the floors of the podium, the steel of the volume, and the brick building. We exposed that view through the courtyard, and then there's a kind of final view which shows that campus to courtyard view. Thanks very much.